God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Thank you, Bill. We appreciate that. And everyone will recite our four-way test. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Well, John Westerheide, can you lead us in our weekly inspiration?
Absolutely. On this beautiful day, let us bow our heads. Dear Lord, give us strength. Dealing with the challenges of today, let us look to a future of optimism and promise, like a blooming bud becoming a beautiful flower. Over the weekend, I was presented with proof of the possibilities. First, a view of a local golf course, again, filled with giddy spring golfing enthusiasts. Then boaters rejoicing in the thoughts of getting back on the water. And finally, a fun-filled drive-by birthday party for a friend's adult autistic son. Now let us continue to find the smiles of spring. Importantly, we must not let down our guards as we navigate to a brighter future. Amen.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. It's very moving. Other than our talented speaker today, do we have any other guests other than members? Seeing none.
Yes.
Hi,
I'm Michelle Rukowski, and I'm interested in the Switalski campaign, so I was invited to join. So thank you for having me.
I see Michelle, and so you want to tell us a little bit about that campaign?
Well, actually, I'll let Jodie talk about that, but yeah, it is the Macomb County prosecutor campaign that Jodie's running for.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we'll look forward to that. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you.
Any other guests? All right, hearing none, I'd like to, in addition to thanking John for the invocation, our bulletin editor today is Carol Peterson. Our 2-minute update is going to be Dave Underdown and Mishi Lamy, our host to the speaker. Everyone should, of course, be aware by now that this week is World Immunization Week for Rotarians. We, of course, celebrate that. If you want more information as to that, of course, go to the Rotary International website. And if you desire more information as to what Rotary is doing in general, both regionally and internationally, of course, go to Rotary International website or District 6380 website to get that information. Dave Underdown, if you could, Dave, unmute yourself and give us your 2-minute business update. Thanks. You're still muted though, my friend.
Am I unmuted now?
There you are.
Okay. I have a question for you. Do you think everyone tries to do your best? Raise your hand if you think so. Brene Brown poses this question in her book, which she calls about being a wholehearted person. I've got another question. What do you think it's like to be in the dry cleaning business right now? The answer is rough. People are at home, not wearing business attire. We have a jobber, a guy that sells hangers and comes to the store once a week, takes orders. He said 25% of the cleaners are open right now, doing shorter hours, 10 to 3, and doing 20% of what they were doing before. We sold our business last July 1st, and the 2 people that bought it are working so hard to meet all their obligations. Last month, they were only able to pay half of what their obligations were to us. And who knows what will happen next month. Through all this, Rotary has meant so much to me. The educational opportunities, the friendships, chances to grow as a person. I found a financial advisor that has helped me beyond what I could expect, given me financial security, far more than I got in my working career in the dry cleaning business. Most of my time in the dry cleaning business, I was worried about going broke. In 1982, we had a strike that lasted 6 weeks. When we reopened, we had half the business. In 12 years, I lost money, $120,000 over that time. However, Rotary has opened my eyes and made me want to be a better man. I think life is better when you think people are trying their best. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Appreciate that very much. Linda, anything that you might want to say as it relates to membership?
Well, now I did email someone regarding membership. I don't know if you remember him, Jay from the bank. He didn't respond to me yet, but hopefully if he does, I would like to do I've been through an induction through the virtual. I think it'd be kind of fun. So I did experience one in Troy. I did want to mention something to you guys. A lot of you have been Rotarians for a lot of years. We had a former district governor named Janet McPeak. Do most of you know her name?
Yes.
Some of you do. She actually passed away earlier this morning. It was a shock. She is a Rochester Rotarian, so I just found out about it, and I thought I would share that with you guys. So I don't know anything further about it, but just so you know, her son is actually Stephen Guy, who works for the Bank of Ann Arbor, which most of you might have met.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's her son. But Janet, her husband Phil, I mean, they've been in Rotary for years, but it happened this morning unexpectedly. So I'm sure we'll probably be getting something.
All right.
But anyway.
Well, thank you, Linda. We'll keep Janet, Steve, and other members of the family in our prayers. Appreciate your update on that. Brian Frank, are you available?
I think he's muted. Is he muted?
All right.
He was on earlier, but I don't see him on now.
Okay. Well, if he comes back on, then I'd like to have him report on the endowment fund board meeting that occurred last week, and what that means in part to us as a club and our local COVID-19 projects. Brian also was kind enough to host on April 23rd a virtual happy hour.
That's fine.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and so our club plan is to do a virtual happy hour every second Thursday at 5:30 p.m. So the next virtual happy hour for our club will be on Thursday, May 7th at 5:30. While we're waiting for Brian to maybe hook back on, I have a question of the week, and or at least an ask, and so I thought I'd throw it out there just to have as a quick talking point. And can anyone tell us about a memorable holiday that he or she may have had?
Memorable.
A memorable holiday that he or she may have had. Okay. Yes, David.
Well, one of the ones that we always laugh about in our family, we had during that time when the business wasn't doing very well, we were kind of short on what was going to go on for Christmas. And so our Christmas present was Glide, cleaning your teeth. And we've laughed for years about how that was in the stocking, and that was the Christmas present for the year. How bad is that? I know you guys are really feeling sorry for me now.
Well, it is probably better than coal. So,
Yeah, slides, clean your teeth.
all right.
That's not what you were expecting, is it?
Yeah, but I do have one. As you know, my mother passed away last year, and when the year before that, she had her sister who was 90, and then she was like 92 at the time or whatever. They're over here for Christmas, and my aunt, I said, you got to spend the night too. So you can imagine my husband. He's got my 90-year-old aunt, my 92-year-old mother. And they're down here in their pajamas, they're spending the night, and he just catered to them. And they had the most memorable time because both of them passed away right after that. My aunt first, and my mom 8 months later. So it was just the most memorable time for me to know that I shared it with them, and they just laughed and everything. And that was, little did they know that was their last time together too.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I was looking at pictures when I've been cleaning here and looking at pictures, and I just remember that. So it was nice.
Yes. Well, that's I remember that, Linda, when that happened, and actually, was that in the winter of 2018?
My mom, yes.
Yeah, because on Christmas Eve 2018, my mother passed. She was 94, so we celebrate her life. But I was with her when she passed, but our fellow Rotarian, Pat Grady, was coming to my home to serve as Santa Claus. And he was in the driveway, and our family had just gotten the news that my mother had passed. Pat called me from the driveway, and he was about to go in, and he did, and I wasn't there at the time, but he cheered everyone up. So Rotary has been a blessing through the friendships that I've developed, and I remember that as a very memorable event. Anybody else real quick before we move on? Okay. Brian Frank is still not with us yet, is he? I don't see Brian.
I don't see him at his chair. He's
Yeah.
outside.
All right. Well, we'll see. Let's do this. We have a very exceptional person available today to speak to us. I want to make sure that we give Ms. Jodie Switalski as much time as possible. So, Mishi, are you there and available to introduce?
Sure.
Thank you,
So
Mishi.
as you just, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So as you just heard, Jodie Switalski is a former judge, and she's running for Macomb County prosecutor. As a judge, Jodie was appointed by the governor of the state of Michigan to the bench after serving as a Metro Detroit felony prosecutor with a perfect trial record. She now practices law, focusing on, among other things, criminal, family, medical malpractice, and business liabilities pertaining to substance use and abuse. A former partner with the Switalski Group, she performs over 100 presentations to varying demographics annually. Jodie consults through her own business, Switalski Law and Consulting PLLC, with medical, dental, community, and business entities to review and draft policies to protect corporations and businesses while informing employees of the dangers of controlled substance use and abuse. In communities, she works to establish cooperative systems of care, coordination, and education or prevention programs. Jodie has been qualified as a courtroom expert on business and medical systems for prescribing controlled substances, substance abuse, mental health, and violence. Jodie has also received numerous awards and appointments and has been named outstanding speaker or presenter as keynote plenary speaker at such notable engagements as the International Conference on Opioids at Harvard Medical School, MD Anderson Cancer Hospital in Houston, Texas, the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, the United States Probation Departments, Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America, and more. She is published nationally, a frequent guest on local, state, and national television and radio. Jodie has been featured in several documentaries, including the PBS short Invisible Runes on PTSD and veterans, and the upcoming HBO special Needles in the Hay. Her current publications include Where My JD Meets Your MD and Your Name is on the Bottle. So let's welcome Jodie.
Thank you.
Hi, Jodie.
That's all the time we have for today. Thanks everybody for joining us, right? No, I appreciate that. And I apologize. It's as cliff note as I can make that. So I know that we only have a little bit of time and I want to use that for content. Like I said, when I first hop on, this is normally a much longer presentation. I want to thank Misha and Wendy for and everyone for having me, but for helping me put this together. And I don't know, Wendy, if we can just move right into that PowerPoint, if there's something that I need to do with that. Is Wendy on still? I thought I saw her. So I had a little bit of a presentation for you earlier and I had sent to Wendy.
Sure, we'll get that going.
See, on?
I don't see her on there. If you want to email it to me, I can put it up.
Okay, let me do that very quickly.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Just, yeah, forgive me for this. So, of course I have to.
While that's happening, I have a suggestion on the singing and things. If we all mute ourselves and then sing our hearts out, it makes you feel better. Just to be doing the singing. But if everybody's doing it together, if they're doing it together, then it crosses, you know. But I just muted it today. It's sang right along with Bill, and I felt so much better.
All right, Mishti, you should have it.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Reagan. Can you, that wasn't Mishi to send it to. Can you send it to Birmingham Rotary Club at gmail.com? Sorry. And then I can get it up.
This is all part of our fun, you know, getting this technology worked out.
Well, and normally in person, I just bring it with me. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
but yeah, I had sent it out earlier this morning. So
Yeah, you have more time. You have more time than you think, though, really, because we get out at like 10 after, quarter after. So you have.
Well, we'll move through it. I just, in all honesty, some of the information is easier to absorb, you know, with the actual video screen. So, but I think
good.
the host. Did you get it, Reagan? So one of the things, go ahead, John.
No, I just wanted to say that just for some filler on this too, is that you are part of our mental health series of presenters. Our club this year has a mental health initiative. Our focus was intended to be on youth, but it is, of course, applicable to all ages. And so that may carry over into our next Rotary year, and when we're all able to get together to continue this particular initiative. So your speaking today is very important for continuing on that initiative, especially in our particular club. So thank you again.
Wonderful. And whatever I can do to help you with that, you know, when Misha first called me to do this, I wasn't running for prosecutor. And so as many of you may or may not know, that office was vacated. The prosecutor resigned and, you know, was indicted. And so I with enough you know, people behind me and supporting me, I threw my name in the hat. So certainly wasn't my intent. I was actually an Oakland County judge. And so, but my husband's a judge in Macomb. So that makes us bi-county at least. So, but we'll talk a little bit about mental health today because substance abuse and mental health, I always say they don't occur in isolation. So here we go.
All right.
Great. All right, hopefully I can control this. So, shall I go ahead and get started then, John?
Yes, please.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and move to the first slide if I can figure out how to advance this. There we go. You know, I think that we all have an undeniable truth. And again, I'm going to be very conscious of time. And so you'll see some content on here that if you have questions about it afterwards, please don't hesitate to ask. If you have questions above and beyond the content that is in the slides or that I immediately talk about today, don't hesitate to ask about that either. Like I said, you know, normally I can do these in 6 to 8 hour stints. I'll go to communities for days and work with varying entities, you know, in their law enforcement, in their schools, their mental health, their, you know, Rotary clubs and other types of organizations to try to integrate services and educate and engage in prevention. And I know that's certainly something that I've done in Oakland County in the past and hope to be doing in Macomb County even more now that I live over here. So, you know, we all have an undeniable truth, and there are a couple of people that are with me today, John. I think you've seen them before and met them before, but I typically always take them with me because I want you to understand that substance abuse, a disease, a disorder, really impacts every single individual. And this is one example. These are actually Christmas ornaments. Here's the actual ornament. If you can see them, they were given to me by some parents that I prosecuted in Macomb County when I was an assistant prosecutor there. And I prosecuted them for manslaughter. And they were young, they were naive, they were trying to make ends meet. They were going about it all the wrong way. These were their children, Brendan and Braylon. Mom had a tough delivery with Brendan. He's the little blondie down in the corner without the baseball hat. In a nutshell, she was given a prescription for OxyContin, a controlled substance, an opioid, a drug that is often used for pain management, a drug that, along with Vicodin and any number of different opioids, we're seeing used a lot more now with COVID and stuff as well, just basic supply and demand on that. In any case, no one told mom they were addictive, and we're still seeing that, an absence of communication with parents or with patients from the medical community. And we can, I don't know if I can advance, can I advance that? In a nutshell, I did my master's in human development, child abuse specifically. And one thing we know about the way that children learn, one of the most common ways that children learn is through modeling behaviors. They watch us and then they replicate what we do. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's not so good. In my daughter's case, she's just like me, poor thing. But Brendan, so think about when you eat and when you are teaching your child to eat, you take that spoon, you dip it in the rice cereal. It's the very next thing that you do. You open your mouth, because you're modeling the behavior you want your child to learn. Then you stick it in and you positively reinforce that behavior. We often make those ridiculous noises, yay, woo, and we, you know, all of that, making it a little bit more of a game. Pretty soon they try it themselves. They make a pretty horrific mess. They've learned how to feed themselves predominantly through modeling behaviors. The things that parents or adults, caregivers of children, the things that they model aren't always good for them, like substance abuse, like mental health issues, like trauma, violence, interpersonal violence. And kids learn it nonetheless because they don't know the difference at those tender ages. So what we know happened in this situation, because Braylon, the older brother, he came in and he told the judge, he said, when mom takes the pills, she's happy. Opioids and benzodiazepines, 2 different classes of drugs, they affect the dopamine receptor in the brain. They create a euphoria for some people, especially opioids. They make you happy. And so what we believe is that Brendan found the pills. We know children can open those pills often easier than we can. He took a number of pills. The medical examiner testified that in about 20 seconds, he was in full cardiac arrest. Depending upon your disposition, they fortunately or unfortunately resuscitated Brendan, and he spent about 8.5 months in Children's Hospital Detroit. He was a crime victim. His parents could not go see him. What little family he had at the time in the area, they could not visit him either. There were failure to protect issues. There were criminal cases that were pending. And at that point, we didn't know exactly what they were going to be. So there was one person, however, that did go visit Brendan. And that's why he became my undeniable truth, because I, one of the assistant prosecuting attorneys assigned to the case, went to visit him. And the first day that I did, I took a little statue of Mary with me and I left it by his bed. Because you see, there are so many different people and entities to blame in this thing that we call the opioid epidemic, which still persists today, and is exacerbated by COVID-19 or the coronavirus. And we're going to talk about that as we get done here. And I've listed some of the things that we can blame, but I don't believe in blame. I think blame is a very useless emotion and tool. I believe in action. Except in this case, folks, and part of the reason why I do what I do, part of the reason why I stepped down from the bench, besides just needing to do so for my family's situation, is because when I was a prosecutor and I'm wearing the white hat and I'm championing the cause for victims, I had to ask myself what I had done in this situation to make a difference. And the answer was nothing. If you saw on my first slide, my motto is, be the change, do something. Rotarians, you can see it there, it's on my right-hand side. You all are about being and doing and community. And so I believe that every single one of us, and we can advance this slide as well, I believe that every single one of us can make an impact on substance abuse, mental health, violence in our communities, to the betterment significantly of those communities. I want to be clear, because you've heard me say it already, about this opioid epidemic. And, you know, Birmingham is a hub for this epidemic. Oakland County is a hub for this epidemic. Macomb County, where I live now, has the highest mortality rate in the state. But as you can see from the screen, we don't actually have an opioid epidemic. And I know you're thinking, what is she talking about? We used to, before COVID, read about it in the papers every single day. And if we want to advance a little bit more, I want to explain this just a little bit. Everything I say to you can be cited. Everything is from a case. It is from research. Even just yesterday in preparing for this, I was pulling some of the most recent data and evidence-based peer-reviewed research. So understand that benzodiazepines, and that's a different drug class from opioids. That's Xanax, alprazolam, are antidepressant, anti-anxiety drugs, are killing almost as many people as opioids. our stimulant medications. Yes, Adderall, Ritalin, Vyvanse, Wellbutrin, some of those type of drugs that our children are on, adults are on, well, they're not killing people as quickly as opioids and benzodiazepines. We're seeing a dramatically escalated rates of cardiac arrest. They make a great complement to the opioid and the benzodiazepine, which has a tendency to really drive us downward. So you use a stimulant to bring us back up. In poorer communities or lower socioeconomic status, we see a resurgence in methamphetamine and or cocaine in more wealthier communities, because Adderall and Ritalin, cocaine and meth are all pharmacologically very similar, and they react the same way in the brain and in the body. Can we just, I don't know if I can advance that. I don't seem to be able to do that. So there we go. And these are just some examples. Go ahead and hit it again of the citations that I was talking to you about. I want you to know very clearly that these are not things that are made up. It's all very grounded in science. So go ahead and hit it once again. The last drug that I want to make sure that you're aware of, and one more time, please, is gabapentin. And I want you to think about gabapentin very clearly, because especially people with neuropathic pain, diabetes, we're seeing a dramatically escalated rate of use of gabapentin in this community. In fact, if you click one more, when we look at opioid overdoses in 2015, they were about 500% increase in this country. I think it was 533. In that same year, gabapentin addiction and overdose rates were up 3,000%. And gabapentin, that includes Lyrica and Neurontin. And I guarantee that some of your elder parents are on gabapentin. That does not mean, you will never hear me say, folks, don't use opioids, don't use benzos, don't use stimulants, don't use gabapentinoids. You will never, ever, ever hear me say that, because there's a place for all of those things. It's a risk-benefit analysis that perhaps another time, and this is what I do with doctors and how I educate them on how to better prescribe to create more improved outcomes for patients, so you don't slide into that addiction potential. So going back to the slide where I said we don't have an opioid epidemic, and let's not forget marijuana, we're going to get there as well, okay? We have, that's okay, you don't have to go back, we'll move forward here. I'm going to submit to you that maybe what we should say is that, in fact, we have a substance use epidemic. That doesn't get us far enough either. Perhaps we should say we have an addiction epidemic, but that doesn't get us farther either. And John's so compelling and so interesting to what you Rotarians are endeavoring to do right now with mental health. I'm going to submit to you that as you move forward in this, you've got to proceed as if this country, Oakland County, Macomb County, no different than anywhere else in the country, we in fact have a wellness epidemic, because substance abuse, mental health, and violence don't occur in isolation. They just don't. Let me make an offer of proof. I'm going to do it in one word: Parkland, Florida. About 18 months ago, we had a person under the age of 25 with an underlying mental health issue that committed an act of violence. They were on legally prescribed drugs. They were highly depressed, and an act of violence. You see, substance abuse and depression, anxiety often go hand in hand. These drugs drive us downward emotionally and mentally. So you're going to see comorbidities there. People often become suicidal or homicidal. That's when the acting out behavior occurs. And until we start looking at this as a wellness epidemic, where all of these three systems interact together, we're never going to see decreases, or in the alternative, decreases in mortality, but in the alternative, improved rates. To stop prescribing cold turkey is not, in fact, the answer. It's not the answer at all. In fact, if we want to go forward another slide, please. Here we have just a little bit more of an offer of proof, because I've spoken at Columbine, I've spoken at Newtown, Connecticut, we know what happened at Newtown, Connecticut. They brought me out for 3 days, about a year and a half after the mass shooting that killed 26 people in an elementary school. 20 of them were first graders by a young man. You can see Sandy Hook there. He's just to the right of the word suicide. And the Sandy Hook massacre, again, under the age of 25, that's going to be important to you. Underlying mental health issues and acted out, and violence. Many of these faces, and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds more of these faces, the majority of them are young individuals. And the suicide rates, again, violence, remember, it's not just homicidal shootings, bombings, domestic violence. It's also taking your own life. And we have to be very, very clear. And if we want to click again, there's just a headline, but it's indicative of what the research is telling us about suicide. And you should know that without action, strong affirmative action in Michigan, the rate of suicide is going to increase in the adolescent population 60% in the next 7 years. 60%, folks. So we have a tremendous amount of work to do, and COVID is going to exacerbate that significantly. I'll bet we all know Cranbrook had a suicide about a year ago. In fact, it was a prescription drug related suicide. There are suicides in any numbers of schools. It's just absolutely tragic, and we really cannot look away from that. So if we can go to the next slide, please. And let's remember, like it or not, I'm not here to debate this today, and you can click one more time on this. Gone are the days where your parents say, or we say to our kids, don't drink and drive. Don't get in the car with someone who drinks and drive. Because now in this state and in many, many states across the country, we have medical and recreational marijuana. Those are now going to become controlled substances or similar to controlled substances. Marijuana is still a Schedule I, no medicinal value controlled substance. But again, obviously our legislators treating it very differently. This is not the marijuana of the 1960s. The potency rates of marijuana now. I was just talking to a gentleman that actually owns and is federally qualified to grow and sell marijuana legally in Michigan. The potency rate of some of the marijuana that he was selling, keep in mind that in the 60s, it was under 10%. Right? Like our beers are what, 5% alcohol. We can measure the potency on that. He said it's as high as 180%. So what that does is it drives people if you don't use it appropriately, and there's no way to monitor it. It's not FDA regulated. There's no way to dose marijuana in these cases. So we're looking at massive accounts of psychosis related to the potency rates of marijuana. Again, that's a mental health issue. Substance abuse, mental health are so very linked if we want to move just a little bit farther. So we've got to do a really good job. Drug driving rates are higher than drunk driving rates in this state and every other state now that has legalized marijuana. So again, just another slide. On the next slide, if we can move.
Do you need one more, Jody? Uh-oh.
Did we lose Jodie's audio?
Yeah, she looks frozen.
All right, we'll just be patient. While we're waiting for Jodie, I want to thank you, Mishi, for originally contacting Jodie for today's presentation, and so I'm sure that this will generate a number of questions. Very interesting topic, so many aspects to it. And with any mental health issue, it touches upon all of our lives in some way, if not directly, indirectly. through mental health, through aspects of criminality, insurance, etc. So again, thank you, Mishi, for organizing that, and thank you, Wendy Hoff, for following up, with Jodie and getting this reassigned. All right.
I don't know what happened, but I just popped up on my phone. So
Not a problem.
in any case, yeah, talking about this, it's all science, and everybody's bombarding the internets now that sometimes this has never happened to me before. As we click to the next slide, folks, we can see the age of substance use initiation. Now, this is the most current data that our country has with regard to self-reporting individuals that go in for treatment for a substance use disorder. And what is really compelling, remember how many times I've already said to you 25, the age of 25. When we look at the age group, I mean, as young as 11 or under, here we have individuals at 10% of them are reporting they've already used a substance. When we get to 24 and under, we're looking at the vast majority, all but 2.6% of Americans have already put a substance into their undeveloped brain. And that is just unhealthy in a way that I will try to begin to tell you. Here we have, again, another site with marijuana becoming the largest illicit drug use initiation in 2016. I would suspect that the more that it becomes normative, folks, the less our kids report. When I go into schools and do these types of training, the kids don't even report use of marijuana anymore because, again, it's legal. Their parents are legally using it. It's prescribed by a doctor, and so it becomes very normative for them. And that's not necessarily a good thing. Now, keep in mind, there are some ailments to which medical marijuana, cannabidiol, CBDs are highly effective. And I'm going to just briefly tell you a personal story. My dad has Parkinsonism. It's sort of an offset of Parkinson's, and he couldn't talk, he couldn't swallow, he was having issues from here on up. His doctor referred him for some CBD oil. He began to use it and had almost immediate relief from his symptoms, something that we never, ever in our family, in all honesty, thought we would ever engage in. But I got my dad back. So, we have to take a look at this, and we have to do a better job of monitoring. But once again, what we're seeing here is very young age initiation. If we can move a little bit, one more slide as well. Here we have our co-occurring mental health disorders. And most compelling in this, folks, is the study where, go ahead and click one more time. Again, we can see that 38, almost 39% of kids age 11 or younger are reporting a mental health issue. Again, studies, and this headline is based upon clinical research that's coming out of like the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the New England Journal of Medicine, I believe, reported in this article as well. Excellent studies, published peer-reviewed studies. 1 in 7 U.S. kids and teens has a mental health condition, and almost half go untreated. So you are so spot on to be looking at this and seeing what you can endeavor to do to help our kids. Remember, 60% increase in suicide rate in the next 7 years is abundantly alarming. If we can go to the next slide, I quickly want to give you just a 2 or 3 minute understanding of addiction. Clinically, addiction is called substance use disorder. We want to click again. And in the interest of time, I'm going to have you click one more time, because this is actually an expired definition of substance use disorder. You can see from the slide that is before you today, this is just from September of 2019. The American Society of Addiction Medicine went ahead and redefined substance use disorder, commonly known as addiction. And they make it abundantly clear: a chronic medical disease involving complex infrastructures in the brain. What there's a couple of things that you need to know about addiction and substance use disorder. Normally, I pick up a cup, okay, and this is how I explain it. I pick up a coffee cup, and I explain, this is how I explain addiction to individuals, including my kids, okay? What's in that coffee mug, especially in the morning? Caffeine, right? Coffee, because I am physically dependent on coffee. Addiction or substance use disorder happens on a continuum. At the low end of the continuum is physical dependency. If I don't get my coffee in the morning, I get angry. I start to get a headache. I start to get an upset feeling in my stomach because, again, my body is physically dependent on that caffeinated substance. And it's not any substance. I can't drink pop and get relief. It must be coffee for me. People that are prescribed opioids, benzos, stimulants, gabapentinoids, and now medical marijuana or recreational marijuana for that matter, are always going to become physically dependent. That's where we want to keep those individuals. As you move down the continuum, they go into addiction and abuse. That's not what we want, because then we start to see negative health benefits and negative actions as a result of using those substances. So that's where, when I talk to doctors and trained doctors, like at Harvard.
Oh, she's on mute.
So again, when does the brain stop developing? The brain is the last part of the body to develop. Structurally and size-wise, it's about age 4 or 5. But when we look at the definition that's on the screen, I believe, before you right now, understand that all of those neurons, all of our thinking pathways, our educational strengths, all of that neurobiological activity doesn't stop growing and forming itself, strengthening those synapses and such until age 23 to 25. So you don't have to go back to these charts, but I want you to think about the charts, and you can look at them later if you want, about the age of first use. 10% of our kids were having a substance put into their body at age 11 or younger. That changes the structure, those neural pathways. Have you ever had a conversation with someone in full-blown addiction or mental health issues? You'll leave that conversation thinking, what just happened? But understand, they think that they're thinking correctly. This is the disease pathology portion of substance use disorder and mental health. What is the last part of the brain to develop, folks? It is the frontal lobe. Right here, right behind what my husband affectionately says is the metal plate in my brain. That area of the brain is responsible for judgment, motivation. I like to call it the emergency brake area. When you're, if you're going to make a decision, get behind the wheel of the car while you're under the influence. Go shoot up a school. Assault someone in your family, interpersonal violence issues. Take your own life. When you're under the influence, your brain actually doesn't have the ability to say, no, that's not a good decision. So the more you go down that continuum of substance use disorder, the less your ability to make good decision exists. Does that make sense? If we can go to the next slide. Addiction then, as you would probably characterize it, and as we move down that continuum, is the inability to consistently abstain. It's the craving. It's the emotional dysregulation and some of those other things that you see. Like any other disease, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, anything like that, if you don't treat the disease, you're going to relapse. So all of these diseases are characterized by relapse and recovery, relapse and recovery. Again, the American Medical Association and all of the big entities now have adopted the disease model of substance use disorder. So moving on to the next slide, I'm just briefly going to touch on this. This is where we look at other contributing factors, mental health issues, trauma, and I'm quickly going to get to COVID on this as well, and how we're going to see exponential rates of substance abuse and mental health issues, criminogenic risk factors, and such as well. Age of first use, the longer you can keep your kids from putting any substance in their body, the better off they're going to be. Number 2, and these are 1 and 2, bang, bang. If you can do a good job with these in your communities, in your families, in your places of business by education and prevention, we're going to be able to really tackle this wellness epidemic in our country. And so genetics, a family history of substance use disorder, it is absolutely descendant. I come from a family that has a history of substance use disorder. Why didn't I ever use, why didn't I go down that pathway? Because I saw them. It was fun for them at first. That, by the way, is one of the biggest untruths that we can tell our children. Drugs are bad, drugs will kill you. Drugs are bad, but drugs won't kill you typically, not right away. In fact, remember what I said in the beginning. All of these drugs, especially opioids and benzos and stimulants and gabapentinoids, create a euphoria in your brain. It's fun. So it then reinforces the body, the behavior to do it again. And then you, before you know it, you're off the cliff. It's out of control and you don't know how to rein it back in. Therein lies the problem. Prevention, 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 wellness, wellness, wellness is the true answer. We only have a recovery rate from these diseases, addiction to these issues, of less than 5%. So we've got to get out in front of this as much as possible. Trauma is one of the things that you see on there. When I talk to doctors, the relationship between trauma and substance use disorder and mental health issues are married to one another. Think of the trauma that our medical professionals are going to experience, already are experiencing as a result of the impact of COVID. They are sitting holding people's hands while they're dying over and over and over again. Those are traumatic experiences. They're isolated from their families. How about children? And I'm getting ahead of myself just a tiny bit here. And all of the anxieties that they're feeling. What about children that don't have enough food, because of all of this? They can't get their school lunch supplements. What about the individuals in the family? I think Dave was talking about it, and he was just so graciously talking to you all about how much of a support network you are for him. And Dave, I'm sorry to point you out, but I was abundantly touched by it. And this is the community that they're talking about. Every single one of us needs. What about that elderly individual that is home alone, that doesn't know how to use Zoom, or that hasn't had contact? Think of the anxiety, the isolation, the financial issues that people are experiencing. All of that has been proven scientifically to exacerbate substance abuse and mental health issues in this country. We can move one more here. So the association between non-medical use, we know that there are more drugs on the street now. The DEA has started to release more opioids in order to treat the pain that is being related to the coronavirus, and those mental health issues related to coronavirus. I can't tell you in my practice of law how many people I know have contacted me, friends of mine, that have said, can you do my will? Some of them were in full-blown coronavirus. They were down, they were ill. I have 2 peripheral friends, not anyone close to me, who lost their life to coronavirus. And they were so sick and so ill, they said, I've got to prepare for death. And this is the impact of what is happening as it relates to COVID on our communities right now. Let's go one more slide here. And then I'm just going to give you a little bit more about COVID's impact on our wellness epidemic. And then I'm going to close and take some questions from you all. The next is our recovery cycle. Okay, this is all about the addiction cycle. And you can see how we need to get people by breaking these pathways and helping them relearn all of these negative learned behaviors, going back to where we start with Brendan and his learned behaviors when he popped those pills. So let's go another slide. I've talked a little bit about coronavirus. There are a number of studies out from Kaiser Permanente, especially already, and they looked at trauma after some of the hurricanes in our country. And they go in very significantly, and these were just released in the last couple of days. all of the things that I've talked about already, depression, anxiety. I mean, think of the obvious things that you all have already touched on: the sickness, the death, the unemployment, the isolation, the fear, as well, that include substance use disorder, trauma, grief, anxiety, mental health concerns. So, this is without a doubt, and we saw these same patterns post Hurricane Katrina and other national tragedies like that, where again, we had an increase in domestic violence, we have an increase in suicide, we have an increase in criminal behaviors. As a result, when people become addicted to these drugs, take Amy Buchanan, for example. She was a client of mine. She was a middle school teacher for, I think, 23 or 24 years in Troy, Michigan. She was a two-sport athlete in college. She suffered injuries. She had knee replacement surgery. They gave her opioids. No one told her they were addictive. And before you know it, she goes down that chronology, that spectrum of pathology, and she commits a crime. She didn't even have a speeding ticket on her record. We're going to see so much of this as a result. And the studies coming out of some of the hurricanes about the impact, especially on children, and the long-term trauma that children are experiencing. Child abuse rates are going to go up. We have got to prepare for all of this. And we see governors in any number of states enacting mental health legislation, opening up telemedicine, which is open now, but only functioning in a few areas. Rural areas in the state have very little access to telehealth. This morning on Facebook, a woman that adopted 3 children that have, some issues is just clamoring for assistance. It's been 5 weeks since they've had any treatment or seen any help. So just think of the impact of that. If we can go to another slide, and then I'm going to close. Why do we need to do all of this? Why is it important that you, not just me, that all of us become active and engaged in these endeavors? If you go one more slide, I'm going to show you some actual prescribing data from the state of Michigan. And I don't typically read from slides, but I'm going to read this to you. If you're familiar with the MAP system, it's the Michigan Automated Prescribing System. These are actually prescriptions that our doctors are writing. Among patients whose first narcotic prescriptions were written between 2014 and 2015, those who died of a drug overdose were prescribed narcotics for only 8 months prior to death on average. Think about that. Physical dependency, not addiction, not substance use disorder, going back to our continuum, physical dependency to opioids and benzos happens in as little as 2.5 to 5 days. Physical dependency is often asymptomatic. Again, remember, you're going to be in the game before you ever know it. Okay? 8 months. Look at the average mortality rate in Michigan, or the highest mortality rate, the average being 8 months. We're 2 to 3 months. People are dying quickly here. If we can advance to one more slide. So that is why we need to engage. I want to share one final story. I never, ever, ever go anywhere without Paige. Paige was on probation when I was a treatment court judge. She was in my sobriety and drug court. She was 22 years old in this photograph. She looks like all of those young, beautiful kids that are walking around the streets of Birmingham and Bloomfield Township and Berkeley and Huntington Woods. And her parents were in an intact marriage. They are still married to this day. They go to church every Wednesday and every Sunday. She has 3 sisters that look exactly like her. She was in college getting almost all A's. If we can go to the next slide here. You can see that Paige was engaged. She was engaged to a gentleman who was a bodybuilder. He was arrested for assault and battery. He came in. He was beating up her heroin dealer. Heroin, by the way, is the same substance as opioids. And so when people move down that continuum, heroin becomes cheaper. And so that's why we see dramatically increased death rates. By the way, when we enact legislation that cuts people off at 7 days, like prescription drugs do right now, without monitoring them, they typically will move on to heroin. 4 out of 5 people that use heroin begin with a legal prescription for an opioid. So we see Paige here. She had a zest for life. You would have been very proud to know Paige. Paige was arrested. There was a needle in the floorboard of the car. She had track marks to go with it. She came into my drug treatment court, and we tried absolutely everything to help her enter into recovery. On her second round of inpatient treatment, folks, she fled. We couldn't find her. September 29th of 2014, the medical examiner called me. Dr. Dragovic remembers her to this day. We just did a big event training session in Oakland County for medical professionals, and he remembered her. And he said, I don't remember if it was him that called me, but he called me about 2 o'clock, and they said, Jodie, or Judge, I'm sorry to wake you. They said, but we know you. See right there, died of a drug overdose. I was inconsolable. If you can move one more slide. This slide right here, folks, is the needle that actually killed Paige. It had fentanyl in it. That is her toilet that you can see. She had an adorable apartment on the water in Commerce Township. It probably killed her right away. We can move one more slide, and I'm just going to warn you, this slide is tough. But you see, I was racking my brain trying to figure out what I had done and how could I have done this differently, right? I was her treatment court professional. I went to take a picture of Paige. I was beyond inconsolable. And so I finally decided I had to go see her, and I took this photograph. At some point in the morning, I'm sitting on the floor of my board, or my bedroom, with my back against my bed. You can go ahead and advance the slide here. And I'm trying to think, what should I have done? What could I have done differently? And my daughter came in, and she said, Mommy, I showed her this picture of Paige that I'll show you again in a moment. And she said, Mommy, she doesn't look like a drug addict. And you know what I had to tell my child? Yes, she does. Because as I'll show you again in just a moment, Paige has the face of, she is the face of the opioid epidemic, the wellness epidemic in this country. And she looks just like our children. What you're looking at on the screen right now, if you can see it, it's a little bit dark, at least on my copy, is Paige's, it is her, she got her wisdom teeth removed. There are two things that I hear are often the way that kids get the introduction to substance abuse. The first one is sports injuries, like Amy. And the second one is wisdom tooth removal, which we know happens between 18 and 22 years of age. So see how everything I've tried to tell you here all starts to come together in that picture. So as my daughter, go ahead and advance the slide, is looking at the photograph of Paige, and I explained everything to her. She says, Mommy, she doesn't look like a drug addict. And I told her, in fact, she does. Let's advance one more slide. The reason why I tell you this is because 2 years before Paige came into my treatment court, I was working and talking with a company. I don't work for them. I don't make any money from them. So I don't have any conflicts in saying this, but this is Vivitrol. It's a form of medication-assisted treatment. They came in and they told me everything there was to know about Vivitrol, most of which I already knew. Then they told me how they would help me implement it into my treatment program. Guess what I did with that information? Nothing. And if I had done something, folks, Paige would be alive today. Think of how profound that is, and how no matter how big or how small, every single one of us can in fact do something. So while if there's time, I will take some questions, folks. If we can advance it one more time, that would be great, because what my hope is for you is that you will truly try to be the change. As Rotarians, I know that you're already impacting change in everything that you stand for and in everything that you do. But my greatest hope, and I love quotes. And by the way, Dave, I have a great quote on integrity. I reached back to grab it by Brene Brown. That I'll send to you. But in this, folks, what I want you to do, as Mother Teresa says, is just cast the stone, in that we can all be the change. So thank you very, very much. We want to advance one more slide. You can have my contact information and reach out to me anytime. So, any questions? John, I can't hear you.
John, you have to unmute.
Yep. Hey, Jody, I've got a question.
Yep.
So
Oh, there we go.
I was just curious what your thoughts were on this. I was driving with my my aunt one day, and my cousin who was in there too. She's about 9 years younger than me. I'm just about to turn 40, and my cousin and I were talking about the antidepressants that we've tried back
Yeah.
and forth, and my aunt turned to us and it's just like, I don't get your generation. We never had these things. We never needed them. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on, because it always feels like we're in a battle against the older generation to explain why we take drugs for certain things. What are your thoughts on like the younger generations using antidepressants? Are we trying to just have a quick fix, or are they really necessary?
I think that's too, I think it goes both ways. Yes to
Yeah.
both. We are one of only 2 countries in the entire world that allows for pharmaceutical advertising. Okay. Us and New Zealand, and we do it exponentially more than New Zealand. So, normally, I don't see it as much, now that we're in the COVID crisis, but normally when you watch a football game, when you watch anything on TV, there's all of that pharmaceutical advertising. What does that tell us? There's a pill for everything. There's a pill to grow your hair. There's a pill to get skinny. There's a pill to darken your skin. There's a pill to lighten your skin. There's a pill for your anxiety. There's a pill for your pain. There's a pill for all of those things. Keep in mind, this was all happening during a perfect storm where Congress went ahead and authorized that pharmaceutical advertising. Purdue Pharmaceuticals, Johnson & Johnson went ahead and lied to the medical community in saying that these weren't addictive, and any number of different things were happening all at the same time, which really exacerbated this problem. Think of the medical community itself. What is medicine? It is science, right? When was the last time that you went to the doctor for an ailment and they gave you the smiley face chart to ascertain pain? Remember, like 1 to 10 typically, and they've got all different smiley faces on there. How is that science? If your frontal lobe is bad, your judgment is not good, and you're already physically dependent or addicted on that, of course your pain is going to be a 10 or 11 or even a 12. And you're going to tell the doctor exactly what you need because you know what your body responds to. Whereas when we look at the other vital signs, heart rate, breathing, temperature, they're all measurable objectively. So we've got a lot of different issues that are happening there. Now, on the other side of that coin, science has gotten better. Chemicals have gotten better. Think of all of the chemicals that we put into our body. Parkinson's, using my dad as an example, is a relatively new disorder. New being in the last 30, 40, 50 years. They believe that much of Parkinson's and ALS is based upon all of the chemicals that are in our water systems, in our food, in the grass that we walk through, and that is different from elder or previous generations. Medicine is also better that people are surviving things more than they ever used to. We're aging more. So there's a lot. I could go on and on and on about the etiology and the reasons behind this. And let me be very clear. With a lot of these issues, ADHD, for example, anxiety, depression, we are looking at chemical imbalances in the brain. There are individual differences for every single one of us. And how those narcotics are going to impact that, it is, it's the practice of medicine. So there are children that truly do need attention deficit hyperactivity drugs. Their serotonin levels are too low. So what we encourage the medical community to do is to monitor. You have to tell them and you have to monitor them. You must make sure with any drug, if it's your heart medication, your insulin, that the benefits of using that drug outweigh the risks. And that requires more frequent office visits. That requires drug screening. It requires a lot more than most practitioners until very recently were willing to do. So, there's so many different things answering that question, and I hope I've given you a glimpse into it as a response.
Oh yeah. I mean, I have a first-hand knowledge of ADD medication. My husband's ADD, and I've been married to him for almost 7 years now, and I get to watch what happens when he's not on it. And
Right.
and I'm OCD, so we just
Yeah,
battle.
keep in mind all of these disorders, whether it is anxiety, ADD, or ADHD, pain, they are physical and they are behavioral. And
Mhm.
so, you know, for example, the medical guidelines for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder also mandate cognitive behavioral therapy so that he can recognize the triggers and start to respond appropriately with that. We can do that with anxiety and depression, bipolar disorder, things of that nature as well. The earlier we engage when you talk about mental health in children, the better off they're going to be long term. So we can unring some of those bells, some of that damage, so to speak.
Good. Another question.
Hey, Jody. This
Yes.
is Dave Zimmer. What about, are we doing a lot better job now of training doctors on how to stay with a patient through withdrawal once they've been prescribed some of these medications?
No.
Isn't that a big part of the problem, is that people are left hanging?
Yes. You know, unfortunately, the CDC in 2016 came out with some guidelines. So here I am, you know, and I've taken the CDC on just head on this one. And the Drug Enforcement Agency for that matter, because they're all big contributors to the problem. In 2016, the Center for Disease Control came out with some recommended guidelines. Keep in mind, those are recommended guidelines. They are not standards of care. So when we started looking, when I started doing like medical malpractice and representation in that regard, we're looking at what the juries are holding them accountable for. And there was a huge incongruence in that regard. The monitoring strategies that, especially among other things, that the CDC was advocating for were so overly broad. When we look at that chart with the Michigan data, you know, where it said the highest mortality rate was between 2 and 3 months, the average, the mean mortality rate was at 8 months after first prescription. The CDC was not recommending doing any urine drug screen monitoring. They only recommended it once a year. They were recommending that you see your patients once every 6 to 12 months. Someone is going to be in full-blown active addiction or dead, literally, before they ever come back for a repeat visit. So, any number of entities hammered. We hammered. I wrote in to the CDC on this as well. Finally, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Dental Association, any number of journals like the New England Journal of Medicine and such, finally forced the CDC to come out and admit, and they did in 2019, that whoa, wait a minute, these are just guidelines. They're just recommendations, but doctors took them as the gospel. And so it only exacerbated the degrees of addiction that we were seeing in our communities. And they're rewriting them now, thank heaven. But we have populations, whole cities, towns that are practically wiped out from addiction and mental health issues.
Next question.
I've got a question,
Oh, go ahead.
Jody. With everything that's going on with COVID right now, there is an escalation of all the issues that you just talked about, which I have to say it was very, very heavy to hear you talk about that. You know, there's going to be a big impact that comes up. You know, what can you be doing to help in the future?
Well, we've got to do a better job systemically. You know, like I've already alluded to, we've got to do a better job of training our medical practitioners, which we're doing. I mean, I've certainly spoken all over Michigan, and I wrote protocols and such. You know, I liken it to spokes in a wheel. They don't even really have spokes in any wheels anymore, I'm finding on bicycles. But I think you'll understand, when one of those spokes is broken, then the wheel wobbles, doesn't it? So systemically, we've got to attack this in our schools, in our law enforcement, in our medical community, in our dental community, just absolutely everywhere. You know, being a lawyer and working in criminal justice and knowing that there are a lot of hot button issues. This is a big election year that's coming up. You know, we've got to have judges that are going to engage in treatment courts and that are going to do a good job with treatment courts, because treatment courts is where you can wrap yourself around the individual who doesn't want to get healthy typically anyway, and sort of coerce them into recovery. And nationally, they're proven to succeed. From like a law enforcement prosecutor's perspective, and you guys have a prosecutor's race as well, with any number of individuals vying for that seat. I know all of them very well. We've got to have people that are not, it can't be on-the-job training. This is a time where we've got to have, like I said, every single system up and running that can engage in risk assessment strategies, that can use, you know, diversion dockets, tough on crime, public safety, empowering the victim, while utilizing these smart justice initiatives to really help with substance abuse, mental health, and behaviors which are often violent or self-harm.
Great. Next question.
I have another question. So, you know, you were saying that the main age group that becomes addicted or tries them out. I mean, I was an 18 to 24-year-old once, and I can guarantee that I was, you know, went to the DARE conferences and things like that in school. Do you ever feel like you're just beating your head against a wall because brains aren't formed yet? And unfortunately, that's when we become an adult according to society, and that's when we get to make our own choices, but it's also when we're rebelling and learning consequences. It's like it just feels like you are like, do you have any examples of when you've actually like connected to somebody, a kid, to make them stay away from that kind of thing? Because how do you do that without telling them drugs are bad? Because they're not bad. Well, they don't feel bad.
They're not. They're fun. Okay.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of educating in schools. In fact, I think it was in 2012, 2013, we did 9,000 students in Oakland County. I was at one school and we projected it out to all the other schools. But we've got to engage, and, you know, I go all over the country doing that now. And there are a lot of ways to go about this. And the one thing I can tell you that the kids always say to me is that I respect them and I'm honest. So, you know, initially, in using my child development background, what we have to do in educating our kids is get them to come up with the answer. Because remember, when they're in middle school and high school, this is when they're significantly vulnerable to this. What's the one thing without fail that we always hear as parents? I got it, Mom. I can't tell you how many times a day I hear, I got it, Mom. I know, Mom. Right? And developmentally, they're moving away. They want to be adults. They want to make their own decisions. So we have to empower them with the honest, true information about these substances, so that when they're confronted, not if they're confronted, when they're confronted with the choice to use, they will at least make an educated decision. Now, keep in mind the 20% rule applies. 20% of kids, no matter what we say, are going to use drugs and illegal substances. 20%, no matter what we say, are never going to use them. So it's that 60% that we have a real opportunity for education and intervention. And, you know, so there are some great programs out there. There are some free programs. We've got to get schools to recognize that there is, in fact, a substance abuse issue in every single one of our schools. Why? Because they have access, especially in affluent schools. Why? Because they have better insurance. And when you have better insurance, you get more pills in a bottle. Most Americans only used 5 to 8 of those pills. Most prescriptions, they used to be 60 pills in a bottle. That's cut down a little bit. But using that study, you know, and I don't do math, but if there's 60 pills in a bottle and they only use 5 to 8, that leaves 52 pills sitting in the medicine cabinet. Access, 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 access. The #1 prescription drug in schools all over the country is what? Xanax.
It's in my purse. So.
Yes, because why? And I'm going to use you and me as an example. And what's the #1 group for Xanax overdoses and abuse? White, middle class to upper middle class women aged 45 to 54. Because we are juggling all these balls in the air, and the thought of dropping one of those balls, folks, gives us anxiety. And so, you know, and the doctors make it available. The doctors for a long time, and I think even now still, are incentivized to write scripts. So the system just feeds on itself, and COVID is making it worse.
Yeah. And just to give you an example of how easy it was for me to get it, I got it from my gynecologist.
Right.
As a prescription. It wasn't my regular doctor. It wasn't someone I talked to, a therapist or anything. I just asked for it and got it.
So has anybody asked you, and you don't have to answer this, is, you know, I don't want to out
I'm an
your
open book.
history, but, you know, I'll bet you money the doctor hasn't come back and done a PHQ-9 or a depression screening on you. Because, you know, even though again, there are places for all of these substances, they are effective when used correctly and monitored correctly, right? But the doctors are not monitoring correctly, and that's where their liability lies when there's a drug overdose. And Xanax, opioids, alprazolam are highly addictive, and they shut down the central nervous system, your heart rate, your breathing. So you have pneumonia or COVID, and they are already putting you on suppressants, or you're an elderly individual or someone with a compromised immune system already. You see how quickly these combinations can kill you. And with benzodiazepines like Xanax and alprazolam especially, people do die from withdrawal. Opioids, we don't know anyone that has died from opioids. But let me also say, of the people that have died of drug overdoses, they typically don't die from one substance being in their system. Because remember, they take the opioid, they get the euphoria, so they go up a little bit, then they crash and they go far below. And the more they use it, the more their body must have it, right? Or they're going to be sick. Then they want to use something to treat the depression. So what does the doctor prescribe? Xanax. So there's comorbidities that exist here. It's a system that negatively feeds on itself when not done correctly.
Yeah. They can't do the Judy Garland method.
Right.
The uppers and downers.
Right. And people do though, you know. So, and now with COVID and isolation, you know, we know that people are self-medicating. You know, the rate of alcohol purchases are up 55% just in the last few weeks in this state.
Yeah.
Well, Jodie, thank you very much. I think that we could spend the entire day with you. You're very extremely knowledgeable, and thank you for the invitation to our members to reach out to you if they have any other specific concerns or questions. And thank you for committing to put your name in the hat for Macomb County Prosecutor. That's something that will be a very interesting race and opportunity for Macomb County. So with that, we're going to conclude our meeting.
Hey, John, can I
yes.
say one thing really quick? I just wanted to let everyone know, if I'm sure most of us know her from district and international events, but the Rochester Rotarian Janet McPeak, who is also our foundation zone person, she passed away this morning, unfortunately. And I didn't know if everyone knew that.
Thank you. Linda Hatfield brought that to our attention before the meeting started.
Oh, did you? Sorry, I didn't see
Yes,
that.
no, but not everyone was present, but thank you, Reagan, for mentioning that. Linda also mentioned Steve, that Steve Guy from the Bank of Ann Arbor, who's been to one or more of our meetings, her son, we should also reach out to him and give him our condolences.
Yeah.
So thank you, Reagan. With all of this, I know it's a heavy topic today to talk about controlled substances. At a time when we all want to get together and have fun and whatnot, but this is important, and it's individually important to certain of us, but also for our family members. So this was a special meeting, and so certainly we want to thank Jodie once again for her valuable time, and for all of you.
Thanks for having me, everyone. So sorry about the technical difficulty.
Yes, well, we appreciate that. And Jodie, before you go, would your slides be available to our?
Yeah, I normally don't allow sharing of the slides. And so I just ask that, you don't like publish them to people.
Yeah.
It's copyrighted, but if you want to look at them and have them for your own personal use, absolutely, go right ahead. So.
Right. Well, thank you very much. So as we do, we conclude our meetings with a smile. And so we have a talented singer, our president-elect, Bill Roy, who will sign us out with our Rotary Smiles song. Bill, are you there?
Yes, I am, John.
All right.
Okay, this is what you do. This is what you do, everybody, rather than picking up a drink or picking up a drug. Smile, and the world smiles with you. Sing a song. Don't be weary, just be cheery all day long. Whenever your trials, your troubles, and your cares seem to be more than you can really bear, smile, and the world smiles with you. Sing a song. Hey!
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And as Rotary says, get out there and connect the world. And as Jodie Switalski says, be the change. Thank you very much, everyone. And we'll be back next week at the same time at noon. And everyone have a great remainder of your day.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
John. Thank you,
I can hear
everybody.
you singing from my house, Dave.
I had got it on mute and I'm singing it out loud.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you all the way from.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, guys.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.